II was the largest and deadliest conflict in human history. Just 19 years after the end of the First World War, the world once again found itself haunted by the growing shadows of tension and conflict. In 1939, the uneasy silence shattered into relentless violence, like lightning tearing through a dark night. War returned to the world, shaking its very core and ripping apart the fragile peace. On September 1st, 1939, as the sun rose on a quiet morning, no one imagined that this day would mark the beginning of an unimaginable catastrophe. German forces crossed the Polish border with full force. The attack was brutal and merciless, filling the skies with explosions and surrounding Polish cities with chaos. Within days, this peaceful little nation crumbled into ruin. The unstoppable German assault tore through Poland's weak defenses, cities reduced to rubble and its people scattered in fear. At the same time, the world held its breath as it watched Germany's fury spread like wildfire. News of the invasion traveled swiftly across the globe, and on September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France, Poland's allies, decided they could no longer stand by in silence. They declared war on Germany, a nation that had unleashed an unstoppable storm. But what they didn't know was that the invasion of Poland was only the beginning, a spark that would ignite a wave of destruction across the entire world. And this is the dark tale of World War II. In 1939, Germany was led by the Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler. He believed his people were a superior race, destined to conquer Europe. His army had already marched into Austria and Czechoslovakia. But World War II truly began when Hitler ordered the German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe, to launch an invasion of Poland. The German assault was uncontrollable, tearing through Poland's fragile defenses. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the Polish people ran in deep, overwhelming fear. After just 3 weeks of relentless attacks, Poland's capital fell into German hands. Once Germany occupied Poland, the terror began. German troops captured Orthodox rabbis, tied them to the roofs of wooden synagogues, and burned them alive. It became clear that the Germans were only deciding when to kill all the Polish people. With no other option, the citizens had to defend themselves and protect their families the best they could, even as the massacres unfolded slowly but surely. After taking Poland, Hitler aimed to build a German empire by invading eastern countries. But Britain and France had a pact with Poland, and in response they declared war on Germany. As war was declared, children in Paris and London were evacuated to the countryside. France and Britain called upon their colonial troops from Asia and Africa. Allied forces took positions along the Maginot Line, a chain of bunkers and forts built along the German border. For 8 months, both sides watched each other in silence, waiting, preparing across a tense and uncertain front. In the spring of 1940, German forces launched a sudden and devastating attack. They bypassed the heavily fortified Maginot Line and swept through the Ardennes forest. After crushing the Maginot defenses and taking the Netherlands, German armored tanks, known as panzers with their rubber wheels and brutal speed, stormed into Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. In response, the British scrambled to deploy their own armored vehicles. But most were old and outdated, no match for the German panzers. With a single shot, the British tanks were blown apart. Realizing the overwhelming power of the German assault, British troops retreated to the beaches of Dunkirk, where they were quickly cornered. With no defense and nowhere to run, they were trapped. Suddenly, the sky filled with the roar of aircraft. The planes dived from above, unleashing a storm of bullets on the helpless soldiers below. There was nothing they could do, only endure the nightmare. Desperate, the British launched a final evacuation. Troops rushed aboard Allied ships, hoping for escape. But the German planes struck again, flying low and bombing even the hospital ships with brutal precision. The Dunkirk evacuation managed to rescue around 338,000 Allied troops from the beaches. Of these, about 198,000 were British, while the rest were made up of French, Belgian, and a few troops from other Allied nations involved in the conflict. While the number of fallen at Dunkirk was not as high as those rescued, an estimated 68,000 to 100,000 Allied soldiers, including those from Britain, France, Belgium, and beyond, were killed or captured during the battle. In just a few weeks, German forces had killed or captured over 2 million Allied troops. In just 21 days, the Nazi army had conquered France and marched triumphantly into Paris. France was forced to surrender. Back in Berlin, Hitler was celebrated like a hero. The Nazis now controlled most of Europe. Only one nation stood in their way: Great Britain. But Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister in 1940, refused to bow to Hitler's threats. Now Hitler prepared for his final deadly move, a full-scale invasion of Great Britain. But first, he had to crush the Royal Air Force. Across the English Channel, German pilots gathered for their final briefing. Meanwhile, on the British side, as Royal Air Force pilots carried out their missions, Prime Minister Winston Churchill delivered a powerful message. They must fight with conviction and never surrender. They had to defend their homeland, even if it cost them their lives. High above in the thick layers of cloud, British pilots finally spotted the enemy. The skies erupted into chaos as dogfights broke out. This fierce aerial battle, known as the Battle of Britain, raged on for 12 long weeks. By September, the tide had turned. The British had shot down around 1,600 German aircraft. With such heavy losses, the Germans were forced to call off their mission. The Battle of Britain came to an end, and for now, Britain was safe from invasion. Hitler wasn't the only dictator casting a dark shadow over Europe. Italy had its own man in power, Benito Mussolini. He forged a pact with Hitler and began preparing his own military campaign. With Britain still locked in battle against Germany, Mussolini seized the opportunity to invade Egypt, a British colony. Meanwhile, across Europe, thousands of Allied soldiers had become prisoners of war. One of them was Pham Van Kim, a Vietnamese soldier serving in the British Army. Soon, the Nazis began separating colonial soldiers from the rest of the prisoners. After shaving all their heads, the Nazis gave each of them an identification number. But the prisoners didn't know the real reason behind it. The Nazis had a far more sinister plan. They were conducting what they called medical research, a horrifying effort to advance their twisted racist ideology. And this was only the beginning. We now shift our focus to the heart of Poland, the capital city, Warsaw. Under Nazi occupation, the Jewish population was forced into overcrowded urban areas called ghettos. In this dark reality, a 13-year-old boy named Julian Kulski made a fateful decision. Fueled by his hatred for the German invaders, he joined the Polish resistance. At first, Julian worked as a courier, delivering secret messages through hidden underground tunnels. But soon his commander began training him to use weapons and even to kill silently with a knife or bare hands. Once trained, Julian's unit prepared to strike back. But their plans were discovered by the Nazis. Their commander was captured and executed on the spot. Devastated but burning with fury, Julian and a few other young fighters sought revenge. In the city center, they encountered a German soldier and killed him. It was Julian Kulski's first time taking a life. The next day, the Nazis retaliated. For one fallen soldier, they slaughtered 20 innocent women and children. In the ghetto, Jewish families were rounded up and dragged away to camps built by the Germans. But the nightmare didn't end there. The Nazis had another plan, this time for the Polish children who remained. Soon the dreaded SS troops arrived. These were Hitler's elite guards, known across Europe as the terrifying Schutzstaffel, or simply the SS. A Polish civilian named Alojzy Twardecki later shared his story. He remembered children being taken away under the excuse of food shortages. The SS loaded them into train cars labeled, "Polish children will be cared for in the Reich." Alojzy was one of 20,000 children kidnapped by the SS. As they grew older, these children were turned into German soldiers, forced to fight for the very empire that stole their identity. Hitler's ambition was now unmistakable. He dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich, an empire built for a so-called superior race. Soon after, Germany launched another attack on Britain. In this new wave of terror, German bombers rained destruction on British cities. Meanwhile, fascist Italy invaded its neighbor, Greece, and beyond Europe, the flames of war were spreading. Japan was already at war with China, and now it sought to reshape all of Asia under its control. It was then that Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan formed a powerful new alliance, the Axis powers. Their goal? Total domination of the world. But one force still stood in their way, the Soviet Union. With the largest army on Earth and under the ruthless leadership of Joseph Stalin, another dictator whose ambition rivaled Hitler's. 1940 had become the year Europe burned, but in 1941 the fire would engulf the entire world. That year, Japan launched a surprise attack from the sky, targeting Pearl Harbor. And so, this chapter of the story, to be continued.